Welcome, and thank you for taking a few minutes to learn more about the draft land use regulations being proposed by the Brattleboro Planning Commission. While this presentation is aimed at business owners and operators, it contains basic information about the draft regulations that may be of general interest as well. Following the adoption of a new town plan in 2013, the Brattleboro Planning Commission spent the bulk of last year working on a complete revision to the town's zoning and subdivision regulations. The 2013 town plan called for a complete overhaul of the regulations and recommended a number of specific changes. The kickoff presentation video, currently available on BC TV, provides more detailed description of those recommendations and how they were addressed in the draft regulations for those who are interested. Brattleboro's land use regulations were last rewritten in the 1980s, and it is time for them to be comprehensively reconsidered and revised. A lot has changed in those 30 years: the town's goals and priorities, development trends in the region and town, what is considered best planning practices, and federal and state laws that affect the town's regulations. There have been many small amendments over the years, and like anything that has been repeatedly patched, the regulations have reached the point of needing to be replaced in whole. Since this is a comprehensive rewrite, the entire document looks new and different on the surface. But determining what is changing and what remains the same requires more in-depth examination. Broadly, the proposal would consolidate zoning districts, going from 19 to 12, and adjust the boundaries between districts. It has broader use categories than the current zoning and allows a wider range of land uses in many districts. This comes out of an approach to land use planning that focuses more on the physical form of development and its relationship with the surrounding neighborhood than what is occurring within a building's walls. The draft regulations also include more specific design, engineering, and technical standards. This also relates back to the concept of being more concerned about the physical form of development. And it also relates to the goal of making the regulations and permitting process more predictable with consistent outcomes. It basically is an effort to make the regulations more black and white and less gray, so applicants know up front what will be expected. Changes that may be of particular interest to business owners and operators include the wider range of commercial and industrial uses that would be allowed downtown and in the districts along Putney Road and Canal Street. Many more conditional commercial and industrial uses will be permitted rather than conditional. That is, they will no longer require conditional use approval from the Development Review Board. The draft proposes expanding the industrial areas at the northern and southern end of town and limiting the allowed uses in those districts to primarily industrial activities. Construction of new commercial buildings or development of new commercial sites would have to meet design standards for the scale and massing of buildings, facades, front landscaping, etc. The basic goal being to enhance the appearance of the town's main travel corridors, commercial areas, and neighborhoods. Some districts would have a new maximum building footprint standard to prevent out-of-scale development. This standard is being used where ensuring a certain scale of development which would be compatible with the neighborhood is desired. Some districts also have a minimum height requirement to encourage multi-story buildings. Together, the design standards work to discourage low, boxy buildings and encourage more unique and interesting building designs. As discussed previously, there are more specific standards for common elements of commercial properties such as landscaping, buffers, parking, signs, and outdoor lighting. There will be more information about those standards later in the presentation. There are also new provisions for stormwater management and riparian buffers. Improving how stormwater and stream corridors are managed throughout town is one of the overarching goals and top priorities of the draft regulations. There will be more on this topic later in the presentation as well. So let's start getting a little deeper into the details of the draft regulations, beginning with signs. Substantively, not a lot is changing about how the town regulates signs. There has been an effort to simplify the sign standards so there would no longer be separate standards for each zoning district. Instead, the town has been divided into 4 sign zones, and there are standards related to the amount, type, and location of signage allowed in each of those zones. There is a new provision to encourage more creative sign designs by adjusting how sign area would be calculated for a sign that has a lot of negative space. That's a sign that's more complicated than just a rectangle in its design. The sign section clearly defines when an existing non-conforming sign would have to be removed, replaced, or modified to meet the new standards. Parking is always a topic of concern for business owners and operators. The draft regulations have a goal of right-sizing parking, the Goldilocks principle, not too little, not too much. It would reduce the amount of off-street parking required for many uses, and it offers incentives for shared parking. So those sites that were once constrained by the availability of space for parking may have new opportunities under the draft regulations, or it may be possible to eliminate some existing parking and provide room for building expansions or new infill development on other sites. The draft seeks to encourage parking lot designs and placement that would not detract from the property's appearance. It would require parking lot landscaping, locating more parking to the side or rear of buildings rather than in front, and breaking up large expanses of parking into smaller units. While these elements have an aesthetic purpose, they also have a connection to stormwater. Less parking is less impervious surface and less stormwater runoff. More landscaping and green space in and around parking lots creates opportunities to keep runoff on site and allow it to infiltrate into the ground, reducing flood potential and protecting water quality downstream. As described above, one of the goals of the revision is to promote attractive pedestrian-friendly streetscapes and commercial areas, basically places that people want to stop as they are driving through, want to walk around and see, want to shop, dine, etc. The draft regulations establish minimum green space and landscaping requirements along the front of lots, generally 10 to 20 feet deep, depending on the district. There are also specific requirements for vegetated buffers between adjacent uses, and those vary in depth and amount of plant material required based on the zoning district and the uses that are involved. Again, the standards for green space also relate to stormwater, reducing the percentage of impervious surface on lots in some districts and providing landscaped areas that can do double duty as attractive site elements and green stormwater infrastructure. Outdoor lighting is another area where the draft provides more precise technical standards. There would be 2 light zones, one for the more rural or residential areas of town, and another for the more developed or commercial areas. Higher light levels would be allowed in the developed commercial areas, while lower light levels would be maintained in the rural and more residential areas. Each property would have a light budget, the total amount of outdoor lighting that would be measured in lumens, and that would be based on the property's size, the zone that it was in, and the use of the property. That total amount of lighting could then be allocated as best fits the owner's or tenant's needs. Most outdoor light fixtures would have to be fully shielded, which is to say no light shining up into the sky, and most outdoor lighting would have to be turned off after 10 p.m. or the close of business if later. There would be special standards for uses that have unique lighting needs, like fuel stations or auto sales lots. When a previously developed site is proposing some change that would require site plan approval, all the outdoor lighting would need to be brought into conformance with the new requirements. In many cases, this could be accomplished through relatively simple changes like replacing bulbs, turning out lights, or adding a shield to an existing fixture. Stormwater has been mentioned a number of times during this presentation, and hopefully this photo reminds everyone of why this topic is so important. Improving stormwater management and minimizing increased flooding hazards is going to take concerted action by everyone within the watershed. It is a massive problem, but one that can be improved by many people taking small steps to reduce the amount of water running off their property. Retrofitting and providing better stormwater management will be a top priority as sites are redeveloped or developed in all areas of town. Obviously, much of the land development activity that occurs in Brattleboro is redevelopment or modification of properties that are already developed. The degree to which redevelopment projects would need to meet these new standards vary. If you read through the draft regulations, you will see that many sections have an applicability paragraph and one that's titled Nonconformities or Previously Developed Sites. Those paragraphs are important for determining how that section would apply to a redevelopment project. The standards in some sections, for example, access and circulation, include language that recognizes the limitations of the existing site, how it's developed and used, and then allows for greater flexibility in meeting new requirements. Other sections, like lighting, as we discussed previously, are simpler to retrofit and meet the new standards. If you want more specific information about the proposed regulations or want to discuss the specifics of your property, please contact the Brattleboro Planning Services Department and someone will be happy to provide more information or answer your questions. Thanks again for taking the time to drop in and learn more about the draft land use regulations.